While many Western nations, and Japan, had a go at creating colonial empires, not all of them were as large as the British Empire. Some, like Belgium and Italy, had much smaller ones that were much shorter lived. But one nation that seemed to be surprisingly left out of the picture altogether was Austria. In medieval and early modern times, the Habsburg royal family controlled many possessions across Europe through both their Austrian branch and Spanish branch. Spain, of course, famously had the first European colonial empire and one of the largest, but Austria was meanwhile unable to get anything near that level of significance outside of Europe. There were attempts to try and get colonies for the Austrian crown multiple times, but at very small scales and with nearly total failure. More interestingly though, one time Austria had a chance to get a decently sized colony in the 19th century after they had reformed themselves into Austria-Hungary. But this attempt ended up being stopped thanks to their own dual monarchical system, with Hungary ultimately sabotaging the attempt. So for this video, we're going to go over Austria's failed attempts at building a colonial empire, and then see how and why Hungary stopped them in the end. But first, you know what I miss? Guidebooks. The internet is nice and all, but I like the older ways of pulling a big tome off the shelf and finding knowledge within. That's why this video sponsor is Hungry Minds with their book. Or rather, the book. The book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding Civilization, is like a history and science guidebook combined, containing over 400 pages worth of knowledge ranging from how X-rays work, to avoiding poisonous plants, to the basics of chess. Essentially a basic guide for so many areas of human civilization. The texts of knowledge make it a great book for your shelf, while the absolutely beautiful handmade illustrations make this an amazing book for your coffee table as well. The book was a result of a huge Indiegogo and Kickstarter campaign, and with that support they were able to not only make this beautiful book a reality, but consult experts for the information within, and print these illustrations on high quality matte paper and inside a stunningly illustrated cover. There's many great reviews and hundreds of thousands of copies have been sold, so you can be pretty confident that the book can be a great gift to give someone. Buy a copy of the book with the link below using the promo code TIGERSTAR10 and you'll be on your way. You may not be able to put everything that it means to be human or part of civilization into a single book, but you know what? This book's a great start. Thanks to Hungry Minds for sponsoring this video. So, outside of Europe, where did Austria manage to colonize, if at all? Their first venture is a bit of a stretch. In 1722, the General Company established in the Austrian Netherlands for Commerce and Navigation in the Indies, or Ostend Company for short, was established. Basically, it was an attempt to compete with the Dutch and British East India Companies, and it did manage to establish 2 factories in India. Factory in this sense doesn't refer to an industrial production building like you're probably thinking, but rather a sort of large trading post fort area. So I guess these factories in a way count as economic expansion, and maybe could have been the beginning of future Austrian colonization of India in the same way that the British did, but alas, the Ostend Company went defunct in 1731, and those factories were lost. In 1775, Austria tried again, this time with the Austrian East India Company. Aside from trying more factories in India as well as one in Mozambique, this time there would be an outright attempt at colonization. In 1778, some Austrian ships landed onto the tiny island of Nancowry in the Nicobar Islands near the coast of Burma in Southeast Asia. They claimed the island for Austria and left some settlers on the island. There was a bit of a problem though. These lands were already officially a part of a Danish colony. Denmark-Norway had claimed all the Nicobar Islands in 1756. Their settlers all died of malaria within a few years, which is why they didn't find any there, but nevertheless, Denmark still claimed the islands. Austrian settlers weren't wiped out by malaria, but their colony was terribly managed and largely ignored. What few settlers were there ultimately decided to abandon living there altogether in 1785. That same year, the Austrian East India Company went bankrupt. Austria's colonization of Nancowry failed, and Denmark-Norway would continue to possess the Nicobar Islands until 1869, when Britain would annex them after purchasing them. In the 19th century, there were several opportunities for colonies that Austria passed up on. Firstly, between 1872 and 1874, Austria-Hungary sent an expedition to explore the Arctic Ocean and managed to discover a set of islands that they named Franz Joseph Land. While this helped contribute to scientific research, and the explorer made a really cool painting of it, Austria never bothered colonizing the islands. To be fair, these are very cold Arctic islands, so other than maybe some sealing and whaling posts, there wouldn't have been too much benefit. But considering Denmark, Norway, and Russia had done things with other nearby Arctic islands around this time, it wouldn't have been the most out there thing in the world. In 1878, a random rich dude named Baron Gustav von Overbeck managed to buy some land in northern Borneo. He offered it to many nations to sell it to, including Austria-Hungary, but they turned him down. Northern Borneo would ultimately become a British protectorate in 1881. In 1884, the Berlin Conference was held as the European colonial powers began the process of the famous Scramble for Africa. Austria-Hungary was invited since they were a great power, but they ultimately didn't bother making any colonial claims. They were content with simply getting a deal where they could get free docking rights with most other colonies. Austria-Hungary had a few reasons for turning these potential colonies down. Firstly, their navy simply wasn't as big as other nations, so maintaining colonies would force them to invest a lot more money to build a navy capable of defending them. Secondly, while Austria-Hungary had a large empire on continental Europe, there had been many setbacks for them as they lost lands in Italy and Germany. Then, of course, the reason Austria became Austria-Hungary in the first place was due to Hungary's large uprising in 1848 and a need for compromise to keep the empire at home stable, which was conducted in 1867. Emperor Franz Joseph believed it was better to stay out of the colonial game. Why focus overseas when there are so many problems back home? And you would think that would be the end of it, but in spite of this, one colonial interest did finally catch Austria's attention. In 1898, Spain lost a war with the United States and, as a result, lost their Caribbean possessions as well as Guam and the Philippines. With a little point in continuing their colonial empire, Spain was willing to sell the rest of their colonial possessions. Spain was willing to offer Austria in particular its colony of Rio de Oro in the modern-day Western Sahara. At this time, the colony was mainly just along a coastline controlling a few ports. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Agenor Goluchowski, managed to convince Emperor Franz Joseph to support this acquisition. This appealed to the Austrians for a few reasons. While Austria did not have a large navy, they did have aspirations of growing it in light of the increasing militarization of Europe. Rio de Oro was also fairly close to Austria compared to some of the other places they were offered, and with it only being a few ports, it would be a lot easier to defend and fairly cheaper to maintain. However, in Austria-Hungary's dual monarchy system, this would need to be approved by both Austria and Hungary's parliaments. While Austria's parliament passed it, Hungary rejected it. Hungary was more interested in having Austria-Hungary expand into the Balkans at the expense of the declining Ottoman Empire. They were worried that this colonial venture would result in more future funds going towards the Austrian navy than towards ensuring their Balkan interests, so they wanted to prevent the ball from rolling here. The acquisition of Rio de Oro fell through, and so it remained a Spanish colony. But at the turn of the 20th century, Austria-Hungary's participation in putting down the Boxer Rebellion in China did result in them acquiring a tiny concession in Tianjin, which they held for a decade and a half before losing it in World War I. So hey, that's, something, I guess. With Austria-Hungary's collapse at the end of World War I, what was left of Austria was obviously not even bothering with entertaining overseas expansion ever again. But hey, at least they had a chance to kind of try, I guess? I'm Emperor Tiger Star, and I'll see you guys next time.